we go ahead. It's 12 o'clock. It's lunchtime, so I want to make sure that we don't take anybody's time. I'm sure you, again, thank you for being with us, and thank you for scheduling this opportunity with us. Again, hello and welcome to today's program, Global Connections, as the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston hosts conversation with Abby Rapoport. I'm Sandia Bayou, Chief Development Officer here at the Council. I hope you, your family, friends, loved ones, everybody's doing well and staying healthy. And I'm sure you will agree that now more than ever, it's important to stay informed about what is happening, and not only in our city, but around the world. World Affairs Council of Greater Houston brings foreign affairs experts right into your home.
Yeah, apologies.
Abby, I'm sorry, I cannot hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I think it froze for a moment there. I apologize.
All right. I said, Abby, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Very excited.
Yeah, it is my absolute pleasure to host you. First importantly, how are you, your family, and staff at the Stranger's Guide currently doing in this environment?
Well, it's been a bumpy road, but good. You know, I think it's been an opportunity to sort of take stock, and so we're based between mostly Oakland and then Austin, with a few other folks kind of smattered of our central staff, and so it's been really interesting to kind of have a cross section of experiences, but luckily, because we always worked across the country, we were really well equipped, right? We always did our staff meetings on Zoom, and so we were sort of online working from home before it was the norm. And thankfully, our staff and family have stayed healthy. So knock on wood.
Wonderful, good to hear. Want to highlight some of your career path, perhaps. Some of us might know, some might not. So you are currently the publisher and the co-founder of The Stranger's Guide, an award-winning publication dedicated to place-based writing from travel tellers around the world. You spent the first portion of your career as a political reporter, serving as staff writer for the Texas Tribune, the Texas Observer, and then American Prospect. Your work has also appeared in Glamour, the National Journal, and the New Republic. You also currently chair the Texas Democracy Foundation and Shalom Austin, and sit on the boards of the Austin ADL and the Texas Freedom of Information Foundation. Welcome.
Got it all covered. That's right.
I wanted to ask you, how did the idea about this publication came about? And those who can see me, and I hope you all can, right behind me is actually the first edition of the magazine, which was Stranger's Guide, and it was about Mexico. How did the idea come about?
Yeah, well, like you said, my background is in political reporting, and I sort of, moved more and more with an interest in other kinds of journalism, but my background was in that sort of news and investigative kind of category. And my co-founder and business partner, Kira Brunner-Dawn, she had sort of gone in the opposite direction. She had started, I think her first jobs were in the former Yugoslavia, covering the conflict there. And she had slowly moved into a more literary direction. And when we met, she was the founding executive editor of a magazine called Lapham's Quarterly, which is based around history. And we had always had this conversation. Why was it that when you think about a location, the stories you read in different places are so totally separate from one another, and there's no kind of moment of convergence, right? So if we think of a place like Cuba, if you want to read a travel magazine or an architecture magazine, you get one vision of that place. If you want to read the BBC World Service or the New York Times, you get a very different view of that location. And of course, those of us who have had the opportunity to travel or live abroad know that those diverse kinds of stories are in conversation, right? A place is its politics and its human rights record and its arts and its culture. Those all feed into one another. And we felt like that was really missing in sort of, especially starting in 2016, I think we were troubled to feel like there was this increasing view that we didn't need to worry about anywhere else in the world. We didn't need to hear from other people. And that wasn't a partisan standpoint. We just thought whether or not you agreed with it, it was important to be hearing from and exposing yourself to other perspectives and just sort of getting a better understanding of that.
Wonderful. Definitely. I was going to ask you, how you were different than a travel magazine. I think that answers the question. That is kind of encompasses overall understanding of the region and multi-layered understanding.
The other thing I would just add to that, actually, that makes us a little different than a typical travel magazine is that our guarantee to our readers is that at least 75% of everybody in the guide is from the place. So we not only are we trying to give you a sense of more viewpoints, but we're also really trying to center on the people from that location, which I think is particularly distinct from other travel magazines where you see, travel writers, right, who are usually based in the US going other places.
So that's kind of very interesting. How do you find those writers, the network? It's because, some of them might be better known, some not so much. And I think that's what makes more, for a diverse representation.
Well, the answer is it's not, definitely don't take this approach to building a publication if you want like a smooth ride, right? Because basically every guide 4 times a year, we have to rebuild our entire kind of newsroom, as it were, right? And so what we do is we start with an editorial advisory board, and that group is really diverse. And so we typically try to include not just writers, but academics or gallery owners in some cases, sometimes former politicians, all different kinds of people from different walks of life who can help us not only get an understanding of the place, but help us connect to networks and sort of make introductions to writers. And we try to really, every guide, we try to have at least a couple very famous, well-known writers. And we've been really fortunate to get, I think, a caliber of writer that I dreamed of getting when we started. We almost immediately were able to get some of those folks involved. But we also really try to highlight up and coming writers because it's increasingly difficult, particularly in the US, to get those writers from different parts of the world have very few avenues to get in front of American audiences. And so we're trying to broaden that and give them a new pathway.
And that's actually very similar to what we as the council, we also offer travel. And I think that aligns very well of what you do and how we provide that experience to our travelers, that soft diplomacy, people-to-people opportunities by engaging with individuals on the ground in the given countries. So we would love to visit an art gallery and meet with owner's perspective, love to meet with a teacher, greatly would like to have a conversation with a local journalist, and of course, different levels of possibly government and so forth, again, to encompass and come back with that better, complete understanding, not just kind of one-sided tourism perspective, I can say that.
Right.
But that's wonderful. I think we might have to tap into your network or friends in your network once we, visit the destinations that you have worked with and plan on working.
That would be so much fun. And I think you're right, because I think one of the reasons I've been excited to learn more and more about World Affairs Councils is because I think it's a similar view. And you and I have talked about this, Sandhya, right? Like that travel is often sort of defined in these very narrow terms. And we sort of think of like cocktails on beaches or resorts. And that's missing out on so much of the possibility for what we can do, what we can learn, and how travel can really change our perspectives and understandings, which I think World Affairs Council gets 100% and embraces.
Wonderful. So back to your publication, there are 4 publications per year, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and I have next to me here, if I might share with our viewers, look how beautiful these publications are. Different colors, very vibrant, again, 4 times a year. And this is now going to be your 3rd year?
Our 3rd year, that's right. We're hitting issue 10, actually, just went to press last week. So
can you tell us what is the next publication about?
Colombia.
Colombia.
And I will say, I think it's maybe our best one ever. So I'm extremely excited and can't wait to go to Colombia as soon as I can.
Absolutely. So after Colombia, I'm sure you're planning kind of what's next. What are you looking at, addition to a different country?
every year we try to hit, we sort of take two different approaches. We try to hit several continents so that we're never sort of pigeonholing ourselves in one place. We also try to typically do a city, a country, a region, and then somewhere in the US. Sort of turn the camera inwards and sort of look at, you know, a place in the US that's sort of more multifaceted than perhaps we think of it as being. So this year we started with Colombia. That was our country. It's South America, obviously. Then we're doing Scandinavia. That's our region and sort of Northern Europe. And then we're doing Tehran, which is our city, which will, I think, be a really exciting guide. And we've been able to tap into some extraordinary networks of Iranian journalists and writers, both dissidents who are sort of no longer based in Iran and some who are based in Iran. And then we're ending the year with California. To sort of do that inward look again, like I said.
Sure. And I'm not sure if I shared with you, but our council actually has traveled before to Iran. We've done also tours, of course, to Scandinavia. And those who had a chance to be in Iran experienced, again, to our discussion, they come back so much more enriched that you cannot communicate that by music, by writing, by movies, by books. It just kind of, you had to be there. You had to literally smell the roses of Iran and see the mountains and, you know, enjoy the flavors.
And I think that it's so interesting because I totally understand that. And I think there's nothing that can really replace going to a place, particularly when you go with open eyes, right? I think what is neat about Stranger's Guide is that it's as close as you can come because of the print. We sort of forget in the digital age the opportunity for print, and we have a website. We do all of the tech stuff too, right? But what's unique about a print experience is that it can be really transportive in a unique way, right? You kind of open a book and, you know, we've all seen those pictures of kids kind of diving into the book, but I think we try to facilitate that as well. There's a ton of photography. There are long form stories on all sorts of different topics. And then we also do these things, we call them call out boxes, which are just these funny facets or interesting, you know, it's like, it's always in the details, right? That you most find yourself like having aha moments with a place. You go into the grocery store because you're looking for, you know, a Band-Aid and you discover like, oh, it's a different system here, right? And so we try to capture that with these little boxes that are sprinkled throughout the guide that are all done by our staff and team, that I think try to give you these insights. And, you know, obviously it's not, it can't replace going. And I think people should take advantage of going as much as possible. But I think, you know, 4 times a year for our readers, what we try to do is give them windows into places that, you know, both places that they're likely to go, you know, that are more known as travel destinations, and places that are more challenging to go to. And give the, you know, our last year, our first guide of 2020 was Lagos, Nigeria. And I think it was one of our strongest guides ever, in part because it blew up expectations and ideas that I think a lot of Americans have about Nigeria and about Lagos in particular.
Wonderful. A little bit more, couple of questions. As I was looking again, glancing at the publication and the covers, and I'm sorry, let me bring this up again, maybe a different collage of colors so we can showcase. A couple of really neat things that we see is that they are drawings. It was kind of unique to see that you don't see photos. Must be a reason, or how can you dive into that a little bit?
So we wanted to, so our name Stranger's Guide, right, is a play before sort of travel guides in the 18th and early 19th century. People used to write individual guides. That was sort of our sort of inspiration. So I might go to Houston, and I was interested mostly in, you know, pennies, right, or stamps, right? So I would then come home, I would write a Stranger's Guide to Houston, and it would all be about my interests. Here are the best museums for stamp collectors, right? And then I would put that out into the world, and that would be one of the guides. And we love the idiosyncrasy of that. And so we were sort of looking for other inspirations, and we came up with this idea that old school kind of vintage travel posters from that sort of quote unquote golden age of travel, on the one hand, were sort of delightful and romantic and lovely, and on the other hand, perpetuated a number of problematic sets of imagery. And so we sort of thought about what would it be like to sort of reimagine that and take a sort of different spin. And so a lot of our covers are actually directly inspired by travel posters that then we sort of change around, right? So the Mexico City poster, the Mexico City cover that you have behind you, we had this picture of a girl, and I mean, it was really, you know, terrible kind of stuff, right? Like sort of caricature of like a woman in Mexico, and she had braids and she was carrying, you know, flowers and walking in, and we sort of changed it to make it this really hip chalinga lady, you know, walking with her cell phone, you know, looking at WhatsApp while she's, you know, got her piercings and her cool, you know, hair and all of that stuff. And the idea was to sort of play around and put it sort of a different spin on that sort of old school, you know, those old TWA posters that we sort of used to see in our grandparents' house.
And I don't know how you plan ahead, but I'm looking at a guide on South Korea, and you see a mask. One would think, I mean, what are the chances?
So here's what it's so South Korea, we really had to change how we approached our publication around COVID, because obviously our editor-in-chief, sometimes with me, sometimes with other members of staff, would go to each location and meet on the ground with writers, and often that was how our commissioning worked. Obviously that is no longer possible. But with South Korea in particular, we had, I would say we were about 85% done with South Korea when we realized kind of what the situation with COVID really was, right? And we had designed our cover, and it was a busy crowd. I mean, Seoul is so crowded and bustling. And so we had designed this street scene with people and, you know, people taking selfies. And we sort of went back and we said, well, what if we just take all of it out? What if it's just that street that's supposed to be crowded, that's supposed to be bustling, and there's nothing there? And I think it's probably, to me, one of the most powerful covers we've done, because it just, it for me captured the feelings I was having of just like, everything's been sort of, you look up and it's just all gone, right? Like all of the sort of norms of your life have changed so suddenly. And yeah, so we gave her a mask, and it was, I think, it was originally a sort of cool, fun night scene, and it became a very different kind of scene.
Absolutely. You kind of bring me to the next point about traveling in general. The question is, you know, why do we, or why does one travel? Travel is also a movement, right? It's not always leisurely, let me go explore Mediterranean islands. It's, you know, sometimes it's a very serious displacement issue that you're moving because you have to, you don't have a choice. Especially now we also see how that world of travel has changed, and how we feel all restricted, that for fun part is missing. I think it's really nervous. We hear it all in all, right? Just open the gates, we want to go. And before I ask you the question, I just want to remind our participants that send me the questions through Q&A as we go, so I'll make sure I incorporate those in there as well. So why do you think, Abby, that we as humans like to explore? You know, what it is that we want to go and see, and what's the driving force behind us?
That, I mean, you know, I feel like it's just in the nature of being human, isn't it? Right? Like this sort of need to sort of go further. And I think it's truer for some of us, right? Like, I don't expect the WAC has a lot of homebodies in it. I suspect this is a group of people who like sort of seeing the world. But it was funny. I did an interview. We did a Texas guide, and I got to interview Dan Rather, which was just a total honor and joy, right? As a political reporter in the state, to get to interview someone who's sort of so high up in that regard. But it was interesting because the sort of question came up for him about Texas, and, you know, why there's so many journalists in Texas. And he said this thing that really struck me. He said, you know, when you think about Texas, there's something about always having your eye on the horizon and going off to places with names you can't quite say and that you don't quite understand, right? And I think there is something so human in that need to sort of keep moving and keep exploring. And I think that it's interesting because there are, you were saying this sort of the different ways that people travel. And right now it's interesting because most of the people I know who've traveled, it's been for illness, right? It's family member, you know, you have to go, right? I have to get on a plane, you know, and very few people are sort of wanting to get on planes right now, as we sort of wait to see where things go. And I think one thing we try to do in Strangers Guide is recognize the different kinds of travel, the implications for those different kinds of travel, particularly in places that are most associated with the sort of fun kind, right? So our Mediterranean guide, which I really like, you know, it has some wonderful fun explorations of flamenco and, you know, Marseille and soccer and Egypt and art. There's some wonderful fun stuff, but there's also a tremendous amount about displacement, about sort of what it is to have to move, to lose a home, and how that can feel. And I think that's really important for those of us who are, you know, get to travel and get to do it for fun, to sort of see who are the other people. Because I think we've all, if you've traveled internationally in an airport, right, you often see the lines for different places, and you can see it's very different. You know, people going to different places for very different reasons and with kind of different metaphorical backpacks on. And so we try to really unpack that and explore it, especially with places that are most identified as sort of tourist destinations.
Yeah. And can I assume you enjoy traveling?
Love traveling. Love traveling.
And
These days with 3 children, so it's a different kind of travel than it used to be, but
yeah,
love it.
And as I said earlier, you know, the desire to travel, to meet people, to get to know people. Is there part of the world that perhaps you have been that you would love to return? Or is it maybe something else that you want to explore? What's kind of on your, if you could do anything, you know, next week?
Like get on it tomorrow. I feel like the places I've most not been are in Asia, and I'm just dying to go. And I know you guys have taken some amazing trips to Asia, and so I'm kind of dreadfully behind, you know, and so I'd love to explore Indonesia, and you know, Vietnam has been on my list for a long time. I have a long list of places, but Asia is definitely where sort of the bulk of them are, because it's the continent I've spent the least amount of time in. I've sort of changed planes, but haven't gotten to spend serious time. Yeah, but then in terms of places I would love to go back to, my favorite city right now is Copenhagen. I just find it to be wonderful, and sort of a delightfully approachable place that you can sort of get everywhere and really just get to see lots of different sides of a place more easily than I think, you know, some cities are less accessible to sort of delve into. So I'm always up for, you know, a weekend in Copenhagen is always a dream of mine to get back there.
Yeah. During the years of writing, exploring, just wondering if there are some stories that perhaps you would like to share. Maybe fun, maybe not. Maybe these are real stories that, you know, made impression and lasting impression on you.
Yeah, well, I mean, stories vis-a-vis Strangers Guide, or just sort of around traveling generally?
I think we're kind of you, and you know, if it is in conjunction with Strangers Guide, but again, just your personal journey, I would say.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I think for me, I was fortunate not just in getting to travel myself, but one thing that I think about a lot was the opportunity to host other travelers. Was something my parents really emphasized as a child, that I think really formed a lot of my curiosity and interest in the rest of the world. And a thing I remember most when I was a teenager, my parents took part in a State Department program that was bringing over judges from different parts of the world, but particularly Russia. And so we had 4 judges staying at our house from different parts of Russia, who were sort of during the day doing tours, and then at night would talk to us about just, you know, and I was 15, right? And sort of hearing about their children, hearing about their experiences, their childhoods, it was so different from my experience. And I think I carried that with me a lot when I would then travel myself later on. And I've had, you know, been really fortunate to get to travel to some amazing places, you know, and some of the places that have been most formative, when I was in pretty young adult, I went on an educational trip to Cuba that was organized through the College of William and Mary. And it was great because it was, you know, kind of very, I think I can see the roots of Strangers Guide in it, right? Because we did the fun stuff, because you have to do the fun stuff is core, right? We got to, you know, try cigars and, you know, drink all sorts of kinds of amazing cocktails, right? And meet people. And then also, though, you know, we got to see sort of some of the stuff that the government wanted us to see, and we got to see that lens. And then we also got to go out with some, young Cubans who, as they were sort of getting later into the night and getting more candid, described their hopes and their dreams, which felt so limited in where they were. And in our Caribbean guide, it opens actually with this beautiful piece by Carlos Alvarez, who's an amazing Cuban writer. And it's this meditation on the Malecon, right, which is sort of the walk area. And you've probably been there in Cuba.
Galveston.
In
If you
Havana.
like it, the waterway with the front.
And it's just lovely. And it captured to me a feeling I've experienced when talking to young people in countries where they just feel like the country can't hold their ambition. It can't hold their dreams, right? And that feeling was something that I, as someone who was fortunate to, I'd never felt that way. And to hear people describe it was powerful for me. And then it was really interesting, another 15 years after that experience, to read it just beautifully stated by this amazing writer, and his feeling of, just a little bit more on that. I mean, I think that that's been something with Stranger's Guide that has really changed me. I think are these writers, they're big pieces that are more thoughtful and more broad and sprawling, but some of my favorite things we've posted that we've published have been very, very specific, right? And there's in our Moscow guide, this piece by a very famous intellectual, Dmitry Bykov, in Moscow, and it's just about this hill. And this hill that he goes to as Moscow changes around him, as it becomes a different city and a different place, that he keeps going back to this hill, and it becomes this kind of home for him and his identity as everything else changes. And that was something I just feel like I saw traveling so much, is like the specificity of those like little, that one corner, that one store, that one park that becomes so important to us, particularly as like our politics or our nation changes in really, sometimes in really rapid ways in different parts of the world. Sorry, that was more than you probably wanted to hear.
No, it's absolutely, that's what's, it's impressionable. That's why, again, when we offer these tours and opportunities, it is about making impression, coming back with a different education and changing that lens. And sometimes you have to look through the lens that it's given to you. You don't really have choice to do that. But I say this is part of the experience too, that you have to see it. Maybe you don't want to see through this lens, but you have to, and just, observe it as it is. And there's a reason why we are here, because we are here to observe, and respectfully so, and learn from that experience. So we also can't wait to get back on the roster and get travelers. And our members are restless and keep saying, where can we go? So we are hopeful that maybe there are some things on the horizon at the end of, or later part of this year. And we definitely already looking at going back to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, which was a very successful trip, and a lot of interest, a lot of changes for early of 2022. I can't believe it. We're just talking 2022, but you will agree part of the world is you got to go in the right season, at the right time. And that's the time of the year. I never asked you.
It's going to be amazing when we can travel again, because I just think we've all learned so much about ourselves. Because we've been stuck at home, and so when we start to actually get back out, how amazing and wonderful it will be.
And I think with appreciation for that just opportunity that we can, it's going to really change. I think we will look at things so much differently. Can't wait.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, I don't think we ever asked actually, where does your passion of writing come from? What sparked that?
It's funny. I know I have no good answer for that, except to say that I have always loved putting things on a page. I love storytelling. I've always loved storytelling. And, I was like in the 3rd grade, I remember organizing friends to like create a little class newspaper, with here's what's happening in Mrs. Pitkin's 4th grade class, and I love the idea of telling stories. And I also, for me, I'm a talkative person. I'm certainly not a shy person, but I really loved kind of facilitating other people to tell their stories. I just loved hearing from people. So I was never, as I love to write, I never loved to kind of write creatively. It was never of interest to me. I always thought that what was real was so much more powerful and exciting. With I love novels, so no judgment there. But like for me personally, telling stories and helping people tell their stories was something I just always found to be a really powerful and meaningful act. And kind of putting something on a page meant a lot to me, you know, from a pretty young age. And so I was always, you know, I was always a diarist. I was always interviewing people. I always loved just hearing what people had to say, you know, and not being shy, right? Just sort of asking people a question and then trying to listen to hear the answer.
That's wonderful to do, you know, be passionate about, and you see something a trait that you were able to follow and progress with as you grew too. Back to world affairs and travel and things that we do. As I mentioned, you know, we have webinars, discussions that we have with you, and travel is another way that we get to know the world. And education is, as we say, is what we do. And definitely education of students, being engaged with students in high schools, universities, probably going into middle school areas right now too. Again, education is very, very important, and that's why we do it. And in light for this conversation coming up, actually had reached out to some of the high school students that are active in our World Affairs Council, and they had submitted a couple of questions. So a couple of questions from them are to follow. One of them is, if you could provide your young self with advice, what would it be? Perhaps some lessons learned.
Lessons learned. So it's interesting. I think for me personally, it was just to be less afraid when I was young. You know, I was very nervous about making the wrong decision. And I think that is just so unhelpful, especially when you're young, because you're going to make 1,000 wrong decisions. And I think that if I had sort of just been told, like, you're going to make a bunch of the wrong decisions and that'll ultimately you'll get to the place you need to be, I would have just spent a lot less, I would have had a lot more fun in the decisions that, you know, kind of didn't work out, or the I think about it a lot because I came out of school in 2008, which I think was a very difficult time to come out of school, until now, which I think is more difficult, right? But these times of tremendous uncertainty, and for me at the time, I remember just sort of being almost feeling paralyzed with sort of concern that I was going to go the wrong way. But I also think these are sort of opportunity moments to, you know, nobody knows what's next, so there's no right answer. So, you know, do the thing that's gonna be the most fun.
Sure. And as you mentioned, you meet people, you interact people, and very often it's people with different backgrounds, the cultural norms, or one might think of responding to you or not, looking at you or not. Right. It kind of brings me to travel related questions. One more question. What are, you would say, 2-3 simple guidelines, if I can say simple, of approaching, interacting, getting to know someone that you have never met, you know, before?
When you're traveling,
where I would say maybe some skills even here, right? It could be individual that has come just now from Cuba or has come from Russia, right? They are not in their comfort zone.
So I think when you're traveling, when it's you as the sort of person in a space, I think it's so great to talk to anyone sort of who you're lucky enough to interact with, right? So your cab driver, your waitress, right? The person who checks you in at the hotel, starting conversations with them, just asking, you know, where they're from, you know, how did they get to this place? Because oftentimes in most countries, you know, people come to the city, they may not have been born in the city. If they were born in the city, how has the city changed? And really using those opportunities when you're having to interact with someone anyway, to dig a little deeper, and ask a question and then be quiet, so that they just sort of fill the space. That's a good journalistic trick that I think more people should do, which is if you sort of leave a silence for a little while, the other person will fill it. They just will. And so you get more and more interesting facts as a result. I think with people coming from other places, one of the Kira, our editor-in-chief, used to say this a lot, and I think it's true, taking people who are brand new to like an American supermarket, and going to a supermarket when you're in a different country, right? It's one of the most illustrated, you know, it's so illustrative of cultural difference and, you know, and how different, you know, people approach food, but not just food, so much more. And so I always found if I'm sort of helping someone who's just gotten here, who's sort of trying to just get their feet on the ground, taking them to the supermarkets in America are unique. Yes. They're not like that in other countries. And it's a great way to easily start talking about what they're in for, right? When people are sort of looking to make a home in a new country, using the supermarket can be a fun and sort of lighthearted way to sort of help talk about what life is like here and hear from them about how it was different where they are. Oh, you don't have 10 choices of bread that are all basically the same, right? Like what's it like where you're from, and those kinds of things.
That's very neat. Again, actually, when we do our trips, we try on purpose to stop and spend some time at a grocery store, just to roam the grocery store, but we always end up buying some things that are to taste, right? It's something made there, and it's something that we enjoy and share as communities. So definitely a very neat experience.
We continued traveling pretty aggressively, even with young children, and so I can remember running into grocery stores in different parts of Europe, especially, is where I sort of remember this sort of needing, I needed extra diapers or I needed some baby food. And you would see just like total difference in what were the sort of standardized baby foods in France are really different than they are in the US, right? And yeah, it was all the more interesting if you have an infant, I'll say.
I agree. I think you have a special gift, if I can say, for our viewers and members of the council that applies, or no, it's going to play on words, but they could apply for subscription of the magazine. Would you share that?
Absolutely. We would love, I feel like World Affairs Council members are definitely our kind of our people who see things the same way. So we made a code, and it's WAC Houston 15. It's a little bit of a mouthful.
And I will share that with all the participants and those who registered. I'll forward it to them after the discussion.
Please do, and that applies to everything: subscriptions and also single guides. So if people, want to buy Mexico City and start there, that's great as well. It'll apply to everything.
That's wonderful. Abby, I think this has kind of come to an end. It's been really a pleasure to chat with you. Beautiful publication, great stories, great writing, great research knowledge, and just keeps that at the time when we physically cannot go places, it gives me a chance to at least take me there visually and mentally. So thank you for providing opportunity at least to lift the spirit and explore the world with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to get to talk to you.
Wish you a great afternoon, and thank you again, all the participants, for joining us today. We look forward to hosting you for another Global Connections next Friday, but also wonderful programming that we have set up for you for next week to come as well. Again, thank you all for joining. Wishing you everybody wonderful afternoon. Have a good one. Bye, Abby. Thank you. Bye-bye.